Well, hello and welcome to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. Thank you for those who are attending, either in person or online. We'll get right on by noting apologies for absence. I have a couple. Martin Veal has sent his apologies. I also note that Laura Wright needs to leave us at about 3:15 today. But I do see Peter Davis online. Peter, I think, is currently in Cardiff, but may join us in person later on. Welcome one and all. We can move to declarations of interest. I haven't been advised of any, but Wendy, have we been notified of any declarations of interest at this point?
I've received no notifications, Chair. Thank
you. In which case, we will move on to the public open forum. Have we, as per usual, have we received any representations from members of the public or do any members of the public wish to address this committee?
No representations received.
Okay. In that case, we will move swiftly on to the actions. I'm very pleased by the short action list. So we've got 3 actions to receive updates on. The first is in relation to some audit activity. So maybe I'll ask Andy Waffen to update us in terms of where we are with the 2 actions as listed, please. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the 1A, that relates to the partnership arrangements which my team are undertaking and the appropriate governance arrangements in place for the partnerships that the authority is involved with. That work is ongoing. The report came to me yesterday, so not in time to feed into your committee, unfortunately. So that report will come to you in your June's meeting. But just as a very brief overview, the summary is that we have reasonable governance arrangements in place for the majority of our partnerships. In terms of B, we mentioned last time that the Torvine internal audit team undertake the audits of the SRS, which is our IT provider, and they should be included within the work programme. They have been incorporated in the work programme, albeit the dates need to be updated, which I think you'll come to a bit later, Chair. In terms of any unsatisfactory ratings, they'll be on an as and when basis. So we'll get the information from Torvine and we can feed it into committee in due course.
Thank you for that very helpful update. So my suggestion is we keep point A open for the time being, but I am satisfied to close point B unless anyone objects. Okay, in which case let's move on to the second action. There's these actions in 3 parts. I think we have John Davis, Head of Finance, online. So John, could you give us an update in terms of where we are with those 3 actions, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair. Yeah, if I just take them one by one, in terms of the financial team capacity, it's very much an interim update. We're just currently working through some modelling in terms of what that it probably best looks like as we move forward, and then we're hopeful to quickly progress then into the recruitment process to hopefully enhance the capacity we've got. I guess acutely aware that we're moving into a new financial year next week, and given timescales at the moment, it's unlikely we'll have that capacity in place straight away. So it's something that is forefront of the work at the moment. So I'd be hopeful of having a more rounded update potentially at the next Governance and Audit Committee on progress. In terms of the second one, point B, and it's remiss of me, I've haven't been able to respond formally to Colin Prosser on that. I'll need to take that action back away. And in terms of C, the trend analysis, there is an investment committee meeting due shortly, which will provide an update in terms of commercial investment progress. In terms of that year-on-year analysis, that's something that we will look to bring into the reporting, perhaps not necessarily for the investment committee, but potentially then for when the responsibility of monitoring those commercial investments transfers to the next body that oversees it. So we'll bring that in. So open to suggestions, Chair, in terms of whether these actions remain open or otherwise.
Okay, thank you, John. I suggest we keep point A open for the time being. I suggest we close point B, but on the understanding that you contact Colin Pross outside of a committee meeting with that information. And point C, I will look to Ian Chandler, but I'm happy to close it, but look to incorporate it into future reports of this committee. But Ian, please.
Yeah, could I just clarify the wording of that as well? Because maybe I'm mixing up two different decisions, but my memory is it wasn't just a trend analysis, it was actually looking at the individual commercial investments separately rather than aggregating them as one block. So that was the thrust, I thought, of the decision that we were talking about.
So I think you're right, Ian. That was my recollection as well, and I think that's reflected in the minutes. John, did you want to come back on that, please?
Yeah, that's fine. And I think when we do that next step in terms of reporting it, we can look to split that out and enhance that reporting. And if that needs to develop in any way, we can also look to do that as we move through the process of reporting as well.
One moment, Tony. Tony Key. I've just noticed your hand up on screen. It's not showing on my sort of, laptop, but please, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, just on point C, I'd prefer to see that remain in the report, please. I think Ian is right. We did want to see the individual breakdown, and I think it's important that that information is available because I've noted, obviously my background in finance, I've noted a lot of comments in full council, which I think has been not correct. There's been false interpretations of the investments of the council. I think that's why it's important that this information is made available. And I'd certainly like to see this action point remain open until the information appears in whatever format and in whichever committee.
Okay, so please let's assume that action's kept open then. John, if you have any issues, please come back. I'm very happy to have a chat offline. Phil, please.
Can I ask John, Chair, when was the last report made to the Investment Committee? Because that information should be relatively recent, I would have thought.
So the last report was, I would have said, around November time, Councillor Murphy. So, whilst relatively up to date, I think, there will be a further update coming to the next investment committee, which will, things move on quickly in that world, and we'll give more timely and up-to-date information.
Would there be any benefit in giving members that report, so at least they've got something to get familiar with, or do you think that's a waste of time?
I'll look to consider that as we bring forward the report. The papers themselves are available to all members of the authority to look over. So from that perspective, members can access that. But obviously, we're talking here about an action to enhance that reporting and go further. So I think for this purpose, I'm happy for it to stay open as an action and look to develop that.
Okay, good. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Move on to a third action, and just for the record, please, Andy Waffen, Chief Internal Auditor, could you just give us an update in terms of where we are with that, please?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thanks to you and committee members for putting your comments forward and your concerns about the proposed removal of the senior auditor post from the internal audit team. It's now not being removed as part of the budget savings, so much appreciated. That will be recruited to in the new year. We've got an audit manager starting with us towards the end of April. He is very experienced, very knowledgeable. And one of his first tasks will to make sure he gets a full complement of staff. So that post will be recruited to. And if we need any additional support, then we can also look to an external resource if we need to.
Thank you. Okay, so on that basis, we can clearly close for action. Okay, let's move on to item 5, which is the Audit Wales Outline Plan 23-24. I understand this item will be introduced by Rachel Freitag, supported by Charlotte Owen of Audit Wales. Rachel, Charlotte, please assume as usual we've read the papers, very helpful, but in particular I think the committee is really interested in terms of the plan for auditing the authority's accounts. So what I'd like you to do, please, is to highlight those matters as you introduce the paper, and then I'll hand over to John Davis, Head of Finance, to talk us through the impacts arising from that extended timeline. Without further ado, Rachel, over to you, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. So we have the outline audit plan before you today, which sets out details around our audit team, our responsibilities, and as you've touched on, changes to the audit approach this year as a result of a revised international auditing standard. The plan looks a little different this year, and that's because of the changes to ISO 315. The revised standard requires a more bespoke audit approach and risk assessment, if you like, for each individual audit body than we've previously undertaken. So as a result, until we've completed that planning work, we can't bring you the full plan. So our intention is to bring that to you sort of early in the summer. There are 2 new names in the team that you'll see in the paper. Helen Goddard has picked up Monmouthshire as the new engagement director. She started meeting with officers and sort of started to get her head around what's what at Monmouthshire. She's met with Peter and Matt over the last couple of weeks. And I'm sure she'll pop up in audit committee at some point in the near future too. And secondly, Julia Owen is our new audit lead for financial audit, so she's leading the team sort of on a the day-to-day basis, and she started working through planning the 22-23 audit. So as I'm sure you're aware, we signed off local government audits in sort of January and February this year. There are even a handful of local authority or local government audits that are still ongoing from 21-22 due to local issues. Which means we're later starting the planning work for our 22-23 audits than we'd usually be. So we are currently focusing on planning our NHS audits because the sort of statutory deadlines for those come before local government, followed by central government and then local government. I know that Darren Owen and Anne-Marie Harking, one of our engagement directors and our executive director of audit services, have been attending Society of Welsh Treasurer meetings to discuss the implications of the backlog of work and the revised standard. And I believe a letter has been sent out to all local government bodies as well, which does cover these points as well, sort of the impact on the fees, our timetable. Peter, please shout if you haven't had that and I can forward it on. And I'm sure, Peter, if you have had it, he'll forward it on as needed within the organisation. So, just a thumbs up, probably Peter's fine, just to clarify you've had it. Yeah, great, thank you. So our intention is to complete local government audits by the end of November this year and bring that forward to October next year and September the following year. November is an ambitious target, given we're starting later than we'd like. Frankly, we're trying to squeeze 12 months worth of work into 8 months. But we're aware of the need to bring these deadlines back and get back on track because, we can't continue like this. So totally aware of the impact or the clash with budget setting with these later audits and, the impact that has on your finance team. So we can't get back to September in 1 year. So hopefully this sort of incremental plan, is a sensible way forward. But I won't underestimate that is an ambitious target. that we all need to be aware of. As set out in our fee consultation document, we are estimating around a 15% increase in fees across local government at the moment. About 5% of this relates to sort of inflationary pressures, as we've maintained our fee levels for the past, since about 2016. And we've estimated a 10% increase due to the revised auditing standard and sort of getting our head around what that means and that more bespoke audit approach. So Appendix 1 sets out some of our early considerations on the changes arising from the revised ISO 315. So there's that more detailed risk assessment. So whereas previously we've had a fairly standard approach, if you like, across all local authorities, albeit tailored for any specific risks, we're now required to come up with a sort of bespoke approach at each body. So there's an increased planning and risk assessment required this year. I'm hopeful, though, that we're sort of laying the foundations this year, and this will become slicker going forward, as we'll have an approach that will just need updating and reflecting for changes going forward. But there's a bit of a perfect storm, if you like, this year with the new approach and having to do that groundwork and gain that understanding alongside coming off the back of the backlogs sort of that arose from those national issues last year. We also complete this planning work in relation to IT systems. There's an increased focus in the revised standard around IT infrastructure and systems. Where we can, we try to centralise this work. So, for example, I know Monmouthshire use SRS, our IT auditors, where there is crossover or central sort of network work that they can do. They do that, but obviously there are sort of local services and agreements that, things that are bespoke to Monmouthshire as well. But we do try to minimise any duplication where we can. But again, there may be more detailed information needed and different people who we may not have spoken to before that we'll need to identify and chat things through with as part of planning this year. The final point in Appendix 1 relates to the greater use of technology. So we are increasingly using data analytics to sort of improve the quality and efficiency of our audits. For example, we've sort of developed a land registry data tool. This helps us confirm the ownership of assets that are sitting in Monmouthshire's accounts. Helen Goddard, who I touched on, is the new engagement lead for Monmouthshire, heads up our data analytics team. So she is hoping to pick this up with the authority, and we sort of discussed a date after Easter to meet with officers to look into this. So some exciting things there that will hopefully improve the quality and efficiency going forward. So happy to take any questions. Appreciate there's a lot to digest there. So take any questions unless Charlotte's got anything she wants to add on the performance side first.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, not very much to add really from a performance audit point of view. The outline audit plan sort of sets out what our local work will be next year. Scoping work will be taking place over the next couple of months. So I'd anticipate when we bring the detailed audit plan to you, which I think is likely to be around the June committee time, we should be able to give you some more detail on what those local audits will be about. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Charlotte. I suppose 2 points from me before I go to members. I'd quite like to see a copy of that letter you referenced, Rachel. I'm hoping Peter Davis would be happy to share that with me in due course. And then secondly, in respect of the ISA 315 element, are there any presentational or training materials you think are helpful to be shared with this committee to understand more fully the ISA 315 requirements, please?
Off the top of my head on the presentation elements, Chair, I'm not aware of anything, but I'm not sure what our directors have shared with the Society of Welsh Treasurers. So Peter actually might be better placed than me to answer that one. But if there is anything, I can share that with you. But as we go through the planning approach, I suppose, and understand what it means specifically for Monmouthshire, we can keep you updated and keep you sort of briefed on that one through committee and the pre-meetings as well.
Okay, I'm happy with that latter approach, then. That's
yeah,
fine.
okay.
Thank you. Okay, questions from members? Colin Prosser, please.
Yeah, hi, Rachel. I was just looking at the IT element for this 315 and the sort of enhanced focus on data integrity as the sort of kick-off for the audit process. that struck me as probably a basic audit function. So I wondered whether how much you were doing in that regard previously, or whether that would sit more, or you would anticipate it would sit more with internal audit, and you would accept that. I've got some broader points around SRS, but I think they might be more suitable for later on in the meeting. But just that really, just the establishing the data integrity as the kick-off point for an audit process.
Yeah, so we have done work on that previously, and we did foresee the changes and sort of the increased focus on IT coming over the last couple of years. So we have actually been increasing the level of work we do in IT audit. So we do already do some work in that area, but I suppose it's enhancing that. It's the level of detail that we go into, and maybe sort of following the chain of events that bit further back, 1, 2, 3 steps removed from the accounts or the finance systems potentially. So it's more the level of detail. There will be some new areas, but I'm hopeful that actually a lot of the work that we've done in previous years will be a good stepping stone, I suppose, if you like, into complying with the new standards.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is ask John Davis, Head of Finance, to make some comments. So, John, you've heard what Audit Wales have said, and you've previously referenced some shortfall in resources in the finance team. So I think this committee would like to understand the potential impact on the finance team arising from this extended timeline, and maybe any other points arising, because my sense is, from what Rachel said, is that the audit process is going to be much more intrusive, and you will require you, the team, and possibly other officers across the authority to turn around a larger number of audit queries than usual. So I want to understand how well prepared you and others are to deal with this, please. So, John, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've probably touched on the most important point coming out of it is in terms of that contact that Audit Wales will possibly need with officers across the authority that haven't in the past been involved. That's something that we'll have to manage centrally and ensure that Audit Wales have ready access to that information and those officers that hold that information. Obviously, it's a little bit early in the process to understand exactly how far that will stretch across the organisation, but certainly up front, we already know that, as we've discussed, the IT side of house is going to be an important area. So we'll be looking to ready, the teams and those officers that will provide that information, so that Audit Wales can access it. I think just going back, I guess, in terms of one thing we haven't touched on really is the discussion so far kind of makes it sound as if nothing really happens until that kind of July time. But we've got regular meetings set up with Audit Wales. The preparatory work and some of the testing is already underway. So where possible and where we can get early access and sign off of some of the information and testing that's required, we will do that. So we're not sitting on our hands and simply waiting for that kind of July to November period. As you mentioned, Chair, it's not ideal. I think as we run into kind of that autumn period, we naturally get drawn into the budget process, particularly over recent years where it's been more challenging and it's drawn upon much more time than maybe in previous budgets. I think the way we're kind of looking to hopefully mitigate that is we're hoping to have the draft accounts on the table by the end of June. that will allow Audit Wales really to start on the main areas straight away when they can resource their teams in July. And I think what we're hopefully not going to see are some of those national issues that really called upon the finance team's time through that autumn period. So the valuations issues that we've seen, we've already had that initial discussion with Audit Wales around how we're going to approach that this year. We're hopeful that that will all be resolved through the draft accounts, so we won't have that issue as we get into the autumn. And similarly, on the other national issues that we saw, we're embedding those now in the practices that we're carrying out for the draft accounts. So, whilst I appreciate that some of those Audit Wales resources are going to be at the fore in kind of that autumn period, I'm hopeful that the main parts of testing will be resolved by early autumn, and it'll just allow the kind of smaller bits and pieces that are needed to sign off on the audit to be resolved during our busy period. I think the final two things for me are probably givens, but they're important nonetheless. The robustness of our working papers is going to be key again. If we can make improvements, even on top of what are considered good, robust working papers, if we can do that and embed all of that information, it just reduces that contact time that's needed with Audit Wales, and that work up front that we do just means that less time is called upon us over the audit period. And just backing up what Rachel said about some of the data analytics side, we're very keen to explore where that can provide efficiencies. Perhaps not during this 22-23 audit, but maybe then embedding some of that stuff in readiness for certainly the following audit period. So I think apart from that, Chair, I think we're happy with the approach. We're appreciative of the resourcing issues and backlog of work that Audit Wales are facing, and we'll certainly look to work constructively with them through the audit period.
Thank you. So clearly, I'd be grateful if you could keep us informed as we move through this process, John. Any material issues, please do flag those with the committee. Otherwise, I'm looking around the room, making sure there are no questions or comments. Don't appear to be. So in conclusion, I think we can note the outline plan, and I do think we look forward to receiving some further information on the audit fees point, Rachel, in due course. And of course, look forward to updates on progress against the plan as the time progresses. So thank you all. We'll move on now to item 6, which is the Audit Wales Work Programme Council Progress Update. And this item is being introduced by Hannah Carter, Performance Analyst. So welcome, Hannah, to the Governance Audit Committee meeting. Nice to have you here. As I say, per usual, please assume you've read the paper, but please introduce it as you see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update on progress made by the Council in implementing the findings of various Audit Wales reviews. So this includes updates on progress against existing proposals for improvement and then also new recommendations. So Appendix 1, you'll find updates on proposals for improvement for our local reports. So these are reports specifically done in Monmouthshire. So you'll first find the report on financial sustainability and medium-term financial planning in the county. And then below you'll find our progress updates. And then below that, you'll see the Audit Wales Springing Forward report, which looks at developing new asset management and workforce strategies. And then again, you'll find the progress updates. So these were also included in the last update, which was in October, and no new local reports have been published since then. In Appendix 2, you'll find our responses to the national studies conducted. So there have been 4 new national studies since the last update. 3 of these are in a series on how local government is alleviating and tackling poverty. And these all include specific recommendations to local authorities, and we've responded accordingly. And then there is one national review on flood risk management, which doesn't include any specific recommendations, but instead has key findings, which we have also responded to. So I won't go into the detail of each of these reports, but happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So questions and comments for Hannah, please. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. And yeah, thanks for this. I've got some questions and a couple of comments, really. One is that the response talks about the asset management plan and also the people strategy. Both of those, as I understand it, are separate documents, separate pieces of work with separate requirements, and yet in this response update, they're conflated consistently through that as if it was one paper, one piece of work. And I think it would be more helpful if they were separated out so that we could see the timescales and the pathways for both of those and how they're going to be working. So there's that. The other one that's sort of particular of area, I suppose, is right in the introduction to the report, we talk about the requirement to look at value for money. And there is a mention of that in terms of value for money in one of the things. I just wondered if that could be explained a little bit more about how the council and Audit Wales, I guess, actually looks at value for money and makes that assessment. And the reason I'm raising that at the moment is clearly there's a lot of national interest in the Daily Mail and the BBC in terms of the work that I did, the Freedom of Information request about the temporary traffic lights near Cross Ash, which does not demonstrate good value for money. And I just wondered, that's just one example that's come up that I only managed to uncover through Freedom of Information. I just wondered, well, how systematically are we able to look at value for money as a council and as an elected chamber to really address that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Chandler. So I'll come in on those, Chair. So yeah, Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy, Performance and Scrutiny, work closely with Hannah. Yes, on the first question, I think it's a fair challenge. The reason those are sort of wrapped up in one is they came out of the same Audit Wales study, and there were a number of points that were common across both of those strategies, and in dealing with them as well. There's a bit of commonality in terms of how we take that forward. So we have a series of enabling strategies that sit underneath our community and corporate plan. As members of the council will be aware, but those watching at home on the YouTube may not. There's been a little bit of a delay in the approval of the community and corporate plan this year. That sort of led to a knock-on delay in the enabling strategies that follow on from that. It's important that we start with that high-level purpose set of objectives and priorities. But notwithstanding that, I think, Councillor Chan, you make a fair point. It's important that members are able to separate out where there are differences of approach between those two strategies, and we can ensure that that's made a little bit more explicit in future updates. But what I would say, for the time being, there's a high degree of commonality in the situation we find ourselves in with both of those plans. But as they both develop, clearly there'll be a lot of divergence in terms of the issues that arise from those documents, and you will see far greater separation of those issues. And then, if I may, if that sort of answers the question on that one, I'll move on to the topic of value for money, and obviously this sort of part of national studies as well. And it may also be that sort of Peter, John, or sort of Andrew want to come in as well, because there'll be multiple perspectives on this. So from our perspective, there's a range of things in place around value for money. Yeah, at a very high level, you know, we have the assurance of this committee. There are certain things we do to give transparency on the money we spend. So, for example, we publish all expenditure. Every single item that this authority spends over £500 is published on an open register. Now, that can actually be a bit unwieldy, because every single item over £500 is a very, very, very long list. We're very lucky, actually. I think that the public are lucky that there are organisations out there which sort of take feeds of this data and actually sort of help people understand it in a way that couldn't. You know, they use sort of automation and things to gather up spend information. So we have the role of governance and audit. We have the open sort of publication of information. We have reviews conducted by internal audit on a risk basis, and then the sort of individual budget reports which are presented to performance and overview scrutiny committee. And of course then when issues are flagged up, they can then of course feature either on our sort of risk register or on the radar and risk profile of Audit Wales. But yeah, you've pointed out an example, you know, the example that you raised in the press recently, and clearly there are huge amounts of expenditure in local authorities. Our total budget, you know, revenue plus capital is getting on for £200 million, and it does take quite a number of different sort of pieces of work to come together and ensure that value for money. But yeah, we are sort of particularly grateful as well for the role of our sort of external audit colleagues at Audit Wales, who we know are there as well to provide an additional lens over the top of that. Chair, I'm not sure whether sort of any of the other officers want to sort of add anything to supplement that on the financial side.
We'll give them that opportunity. No, Matt, you're on your own. So, Ian, did you want to come back at any point, please?
Yeah, I mean, that's all. I mean, I must say that it's news to me about the register, which I feel, I'm not sure if that's a failure on my part or a failure on the council's part, that as a member of Governance and Audit Committee, I wasn't actually aware that register even existed or how to access it. And I'm not sure how many members of many council taxpayers in the county would know how to access that. So that's an interesting thing. But I suppose, I mean, just using that particular one as an example, I mean, I appreciate that we do spend a lot of money, but £125,000 is a significant percentage, actually, of our budget. And, you know, so just using that as one example, I suppose it's the sense of, we talk a lot in terms of the audit of how we are assured that the figures that are in front of us are accurate. I just suppose even in your answer, Matt, I just don't see actually how we are assessing that the figures that are in front of us are actually good value. That side of things doesn't actually seem to be that transparent to me. And I think that's a role more for officers, I think, than this committee, because we're only as good as the information that we're given. And if we're not given the information, we can't perform that function. So I think that's throwing it back to officers more generally.
Yeah, thanks. I think Sophia challenged, and probably one thing it was remiss of me not to mention. I know a lot of members of the committee will be familiar with the process around contract standing orders, which I didn't talk about. So that's the process by which, within the council's constitution and sort of standing orders, certain expenditure limits are reserved to different decision-making bodies. And that sets out the steps that you have to go through before procuring any goods, works or services. Now, at the very high level, that's aligned into sort of what were EU procurement limits around sort of tendering at a national level. and then at the lower level you can, I think sums at above £10,000 require 3 quotes. We're required to go off certain contracts which are set up, and our call-off contracts organised by our joint procurement team across Monmouthshire and Cardiff. And then if there is an exception, if an officer steps outside those pre-agreed procurement arrangements, before doing so, they have to contact the Chief Internal Auditor, who issues an exemption number, and a report is issued to this committee of any procurement that's taken place outside of those processes. So that's the kind of the process we need to follow to ensure value for money. So things that are generally above certain values, either a competitive process advertised on Sell to Wales with a published tender, or for lower value sums, the seeking of three quotes from providers, so that we can demonstrate value for money. I'm afraid I don't have the details of the specific example which was highlighted by yourself recently in the press, but obviously I'm not sure where you are in terms of the response to that, but clearly we can seek the details of what's happened on that individual case to report back to you. But again, I think the important thing about local democracy is actually, having found that it's been raised, been publicised, and actually you're asking questions in that of this committee, which has said, well, actually, given that one got through, are there issues we need to look at in our process? So ultimately, behind all of this, we have 46 elected members and lay people on this committee that are there in the event that systems do fail to ask sort of further questions and ensure that the sort of the organisation officers and cabinet are held to account for upholding those standards.
Okay, thank you. I think Charlotte Owen from Audit Wales wants to come in at this point. Charlotte.
Yeah, it was just sort of follow up in terms of the question about Audit Wales's role in this. So in terms of the local work that I'm involved in at Monmouthshire, we would look at the arrangements that the council has in place around securing value for money, and we would comment on those arrangements. So, for example, do the various committees have the information that they need to be able to make those judgments? So, for example, in the Springing Forward report, one of our recommendations is around ensuring that the reporting mechanism and the measurements for measuring progress against those strategies enable people like the scrutiny committee to be able to assess value for money. So yeah, our role is around those arrangements that sit around it.
Thank you, Charlotte. Ian, did you want to come back? Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll move on. Can I go to Tony Easton first, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's more of an observation rather than a question, and we've got Annette Evans on the line and we've got Matthew. It's to do with the fact that Ian had to resort to an FOI to get the information he required. Now, as elected members, we shouldn't need to do that, and there is criticism of elected members using the FOI system or the use of your FOI. I just wonder if that could be clarified by Matt and by Annette, so that we don't need to don't need to resort to that particular process. It slows down the work of a member. Any observation?
Yeah, I think, yeah, thanks for raising the point. You are right. I mean, the freedom of information request is a bit of a sort of a blunt or a heavy-handed instrument to get at information. Far better is to ensure that through our sort of publication scheme and other process, that all of this information is available and members know where to access it. I mean, Councillor Chandler made the point he wasn't aware of the £500 publication thing, and I imagine a lot of members wouldn't be, nor would members of the public. I think the onus is on us as an organisation, because all of this information is in the public domain, but of course so are tens of thousands of pages of information. And I think the challenge for us as an organisation is to ensure that we make that available in an accessible way to people. One of the other things I know that we need to get better at as an organisation, we've had a go at it over a number of years, is publishing kind of what's called open data. So publishing data in a way that sort of artificial intelligence and bots can sort of scrape it and access it easily, and search engines can find it easily, because we know the reality is that no matter how much information is on our website, unless that's effectively indexed by Google, or other search engines are available, but that's how most of us get our information these days. And we don't really go into individual websites and trawl them. So I think that again sort of highlights an area for development. If I give an example of the spend information, we do publish that as what's known as an open data feed. And if they still exist, I know there was an organisation called the Spend Network, just a sort of group of interested people that write a programme that scrapes all of this information off and analyses it for each local authority. Things like how much do you spend with local suppliers, this sort of categorising the information for all of the local authorities. And as there's understandably increasing interest in the work that local government does, ensuring value for money and openness, I think it's sort of really encouraging that there are groups out there that do this work, and the onus is on us to publish information in a way which is accessible to elected members, incredibly importantly, but also to the wider public that are interested.
I'm not sure that answered my question, but in total, but I think the point has been made, that's all.
Okay, we've got Rodri Guest, and then go to Colin. Rodri, please.
Great, thanks. Matthew mentioned a couple of times there about accessibility. I found some of the language in the report quite heavy. So it's less of a question, more of a comment. I just wondered about having a bit more concise in places. And I also wondered about some timelines. So there was a few opportunities within them. I thought, well, actually, it'd be relevant to actually have an idea when something would happen. So not a question, more a comment.
Yeah. Thanks very much for the comment. We'll take that away, and I know certainly I've had an exchange with the chair recently as well, and around conciseness of reports, and I know that that's something you have in common, and it's the old adage, isn't it? I can't remember who said it, but I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one, and there is a skill in including the key information concisely, and when we're a bit rushed and hurried, the tendency can be sometimes to throw everything in and let the reader do the work. When actually it should be us doing the work and making it easy for the reader.
Pascal, a French mathematician.
Yeah, I think.
So thank you. Just a comment upon that comment. So Matthew, you're quite right, because in the cover paper you're asking us to note the adequacy of progress in regard to these matters. And I think the way the report is constructed, I think that's quite difficult for us to do. I think we can note the progress, but whether it's adequate or not is slightly trickier, and that plays to Rodri's point, and which we can discuss. We can pick up again in future time. Colin Prosser, please.
I noticed in the appendices about the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014. In regard to, the one I picked out was social enterprise. So looking at the sort of the actions going forward, it looks like there's sort of slippage going into a decade, which apparently is a Wales-wide issue as opposed to, so I don't know whether that's more an Audit Wales problem as a Monmouthshire problem, but given the economic deprivation across the country, but nevertheless, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of, because there's going to be a light touch actions on it going forward now. So it doesn't look like we're going to progress that or see it as key to where we need to move with poverty at this time.
Yeah, again, Chair, and I'm not sure whether sort of Charlotte would want to come in on that as a national study. I'm afraid I don't have a huge amount to add to that, because it's not an area I have sort of intricate knowledge of. But it is clearly an incredibly important area of work, and as we're very fortunate in Monmouthshire, the third sector and the opportunities we have to to work with others. And I think the sort of report recognises that. It's something we have to be particularly mindful of. But I probably need to study that in a little bit more detail and come back to you with a written response, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Peter Strong, please.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, it's pointed out we have a duty to encourage social enterprise, but also to measure their impact. Now, in relation to that, do we actually have a register, and should we have a register of social enterprises within the county?
We don't have a I'm not aware that we have a register of social enterprises. I may be wrong on that. There is one piece of work that has been done. I mean, I think it may have been just immediately prior to the last election, looking at the various partnerships and joint services that the authority has in place, where we fund or in some way sort of enable the operation of other organisations. So, for example, we provide grant funding to, I appreciate I'm going wider than social enterprises, but something like GAVO, the Gwent Association of voluntary organisations, a small amount of funding there, Citizens Advice Monmouthshire. So our sort of knowledge and oversight is greater where there is a financial relationship, either contractual or grant funding. But we don't have, to the best of my knowledge, an oversight of all of the individual social enterprises that could exist. But of course, those which become more prominent, start to add value and make a difference locally, clearly come onto our radar. And in that instance, we often will engage either formally or informally with those through things like our sort of town centre work in clustering, or through our partnerships and community development team. So there tends to be quite an organic relationship with those rather than a formal one.
I mean, just following up on that, because I think I've seen through our network of green councillors around England and Wales that there's been some quite innovative approaches in terms of community-driven social care partnerships. And given that the particular challenge that we have in finding social care partners and providers, I wondered whether that would be an area that actually the council could almost see as a pilot if we wanted to look at supporting social care, supporting social enterprises, is look at the social care component of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much for the observation or question. But I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Chandler. From memory, I think Monmouthshire Housing Association are doing some work in this space, which I think my social care colleagues were looking at quite closely. So one of the things they were doing in a sort of pocket of one of the areas where they have properties is to sort of form or trying to encourage a cooperative of care workers. Because we know this is a difficult market segment, and in particular parts of our county, we really do struggle to get carers. It's understandable. We know that our property prices are high, wages in the care sector are not high, and then the cost of commuting, travel to certain areas can be quite prohibitive. So I know there was that sort of exploration there around a cooperative of carers, and some of my social care colleagues, I think Claire Robbins, who some of you may know, they've been exploring the potential around sort of micro care on a very sort of hyper-local basis, which takes out the travelling time and perhaps brings people into that workforce that may previously not have considered it, perhaps because they didn't drive or don't want to commit to a large number of hours. So you could actually sort of become a carer on a very small cluster of streets on a hyper-local level. It's diverging a little bit, but one of the sort of interesting areas that Deb Hill-Howells, who's got the head of decarbonisation, is exploring is, potentially things like electric cars, whether you could subscribe to an electric car scheme that would give people living outside our immediate geography that may struggle with the costs of running a car or wouldn't necessarily think to travel into our area, access to sort of a community car scheme, which would be electric, so we're not polluting or increasing the carbon footprint, but to enable them to travel into and throughout our counties. So, these are early stages ideas. When you're right, these are all the sort of things we need to be exploring, aren't we, to broaden the workforce, but also to do that with the minimum impact on the environment and the maximum sort of ability to get more people into key workforce areas where we struggle for a whole range of reasons.
Okay, thank you. Any more? Okay, so by means of conclusion then, so thank you for the paper. I think we can note it. Hannah, so thank you very much for your hard work in putting the paper together. Much appreciated. We've had a really sort of informative and detailed discussion. So that's great. Please feel free to stay on the meeting, Hannah, or indeed if you want to make your escape, please do so. Entirely up to you.
I'm afraid I need it for the other reports as well. Many of you know that Richard Jones, our performance manager, does a lot of this. Richard's unfortunately off at the moment, and without Hannah, I'm lost. So please don't send her away.
Okay, you need some cover. Right you are, Matt. No problems. Okay. In which case we shall move on to item 7. Item 7 is the whole authority complaints report for a period April 21 to March 22. We are joined by Annette Evans, Customer Relations Manager. Welcome back, Annette, to the committee. As per usual, assume we have read the paper, but please introduce it and then we'll come back for questions and comments. Over to you, Annette.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report provides you with an overview of the complaints, comments and compliments that we've dealt with from the 1st of April 2021 to the end of March 2022. So it covers the whole authority complaints, compliments and comments, and also social services, the complaints procedure. So with regard to the whole authority procedure, there's 2 stages, and that's the informal resolution stage, where that's where we try and deal with the majority of the complaints and try and resolve them as much as possible. And then if people remain dissatisfied, they can go then to the formal investigation stage. And that's where I appoint an officer from another part of the service that is not that's not dealing with the issues with the complaints, in that particular service. Someone else from another part looks at the complaint, investigates it, and comes up with a report on the outcome of the complaint raised. So if people are still dissatisfied, they can go on to the Ombudsman, and then the Ombudsman can choose whether they wish to investigate the complaint or not. So that's an overview of how we, the process, the informal and formal stage, and then the Ombudsman, and then also we deal with comments. So this is where people, complainants, customers, they don't want to go through a formal process. They just want to raise an issue, a gripe. It can be a positive or a negative comment. So we log those comments and we deal with them in the same way as we would deal with our stage 1 complaints, and try and resolve them as quickly as possible. Our timescales for stage 1 complaints is 10 working days, and stage 2 complaints, after the complaint has been agreed with the complainant, is 20 working days plus a further 10 days then for the head of service to respond to the report, outlining what they're going to do with the findings and any recommendations made. So a lot of issues are logged as comments, and then we've got the social services complaints process, and that's a statutory requirement where we have to have an informal stage and a formal consideration stage. The timescales are different. The informal stage is 17 working days and the formal stage is 25 working days. And for social services, when it gets to the formal stage, we have to appoint an external investigating officer. Where if there's complaints relating to children's services, we also have to have an independent person as well as the external investigator to investigate the complaints. So I'll come back to social services in a moment. Learning from complaints is really important. We do our best, you know, to try and you know, if something goes wrong, you know, that perhaps we don't do that again. We provide apologies where appropriate, or we try and, you know, put back a service in where perhaps it, you know, it was taken away or whatever. So yeah, so learning from complaints is important, and action plans are always drawn up after formal investigations, both for whole authority and social services. And then those action plans are sent to the relevant head of service for them to implement the recommendations made and then report back to say when they've been done. So I've said about complaints and comments. We also get compliments. So that's always nice to receive that, you know, people, as much as people complain about services and you know, the majority of complaints are in waste recycling and waste services, highways. It's nice that we also get compliments about those services as well. So I just wanted to mention about the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales. They provide us with online training, and that's free. And we've trained a lot of people up recently, over 120 staff, on communication skills, investigation skills, and that's helpful in when I ask people, you know, to investigate complaints, that they've had some training on it and they know what's required. I do have to say that with, you know, officers, their workloads expanding, it is difficult these days to get officers to investigate whole authority complaints. Because, you know, it's extra on top of their already busy workload, and then that can have an effect on the timescales of when complaints are started and when they're completed. So there's Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. And Appendix 1, it goes into the detail of the whole authority complaints, comments and compliments. And you can see from that we've had 163 complaints for whole authority, 455 comments and 246 compliments for this period. The figures are, you know, are relatively the same as for the previous year. The comments have increased. So that's, you know, that's how it is. That happens. The sorts of complaints in the report, you know, it tells you the sorts of issues that we come across time and time again is about lack of responses to communications, staff conduct, features regularly as well. I've mentioned the service areas that we get the most complaints in, and that's detailed there in the report. I then go on to say about the formal investigations, and that's where people are dissatisfied and they've asked for their complaint to be formally investigated, and there were 12 formal complaints that were investigated. And then I've outlined to you there what they were about. And then the Ombudsman, those people that are still not satisfied, even after we've done our whole authority investigation, that they go on to the Ombudsman. There's also then a section on the comments, the amount of comments that we've received. And the sort of comments that people have made. And it, again, it's about those services that I mentioned, waste and street services, highways, and then there's some others there as well. It's pleasing that we had 246 compliments about services, and I've also highlighted to you some of the compliments that we've received and what people are saying about the service. There's also a section there on the response timescales, and like I mentioned earlier, sometimes they're taking much longer now because of increased workloads of officers, and not only that, it could well be staff sickness, people on leave, or the complainants are not available, etc. So we don't always meet those targets that are set down. So that's the whole authority process. And then we've got the social services complaints process, which is in Appendix 2. And again, as I said, stage 1 is local resolution. We've got 17 working days. Stage 2, formal investigation. The table there tells you how many complaints we've had overall in social services, which were 40 complaints overall, 84 comments and 111 compliments. In adult services, there were 17 complaints, and that's 13 complaints at stage 1. There were 72 comments and there were 101 compliments. In children's services, we had 23 complaints, 12 comments and 10 compliments. We don't get the amount of compliments and comments in children's services like in adult services, because in adult services, we send out a questionnaire, community care questionnaire on a monthly basis. And this is to people, to regular and new service users. And we ask them to comment on the service that they're receiving, and that qualitative information that comes back, whether it's a positive or a negative comment, we then follow up with the relevant teams, and we log all of these comments as well. And we get a lot of compliments, mainly from the home, about the home care providers. We equally get comments about perhaps they're not turning up on time, or they feel they should have more time, etc. And then it's given you an idea of the sorts of complaints we get for both adult services and children's services. And then the complaints then that proceeded to the Ombudsman, or not, as the case may be. You'll see then that I've also given you a flavour of the comments that we've received, and also the compliments that we've received about the service. And some, there's some lovely compliments there about both adult services and children's services. You'll see that the Public Services Ombudsman, regarding adult services, one complaint contacted the Ombudsman, but they decided not to investigate. And Children's Services, one complainant contacted the Ombudsman and they didn't investigate. Again, I've given you the timescales there and the amount of complaints that are dealt with within the prescribed timescales and whether they've gone over or not. But in social services particularly, you know, these cases are always very complex, not straightforward. So more often than not, they do go over the timescales. As with the whole authority complaints, social services complaints, you know, we do like to learn lessons from them. And again, we have action plans, and you know, we make sure that any recommendations arising out of the complaints investigations that we follow up on, and you know, in order that improvements can be made to services and processes if necessary. So that just gives you a flying visit of the whole authority and social services complaints procedure. So I'm happy to take any questions anybody wishes to raise.
Thank you, Annette. Firstly, we're very grateful for your attendance and talking us through that paper. Clearly a lot of detail there, and I do think it's given us you know, some insights into the complaints and comments received, so that is interesting. I suppose my overriding observation is I'm grappling over whether these matters are wholly relevant to this committee, but I'll take that offline and discuss that with officers. I'll now go to the floor. First question from Ian. Ian Chandler, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Annette. I've got a lot of questions, actually. Apologies for that, and comments. Some of them in details, and then some maybe a little bit bigger picture. I suppose just looking at some of the detailed ones, let's knock those off. I suppose the charts, the bar charts that you use only show 3 years, but obviously if we get deep into the text, we see 5 years of trends, and obviously the text, the 5-year trends aren't as complementary as the 3-year ones. So just as a little bit of creativeness with the choice of the timescale for the bar charts, I think maybe is not that helpful. I've got a particular concern about, in Appendix 2, to say that there were no complaints received from children and young people. That sets off a big alarm bell for me, and I'd like to know why. Obviously, there have been complaints for children's social services that have come from parents and carers. The fact that none have come from children themselves, for me, is actually not a cause of celebration. It's a cause of real concern about why they feel they're unable to do that. So there's that there. I think what you were saying about timescales exceeding the statutory requirements, and you were talking about them as targets, they are statutory requirements, and yeah, and those requirements were set in train knowing that actually social care is complex. So the number that are exceeding the statutory requirement of 25 working days, which we're talking about, is 6 to 7 weeks, is of extreme concern for me. So those are ones there.
Ian, would it be helpful to just ask those few questions first, ask Annette to respond, and then continue?
Yeah.
Annette, please.
Okay. I take on board with regard what you say about the choice of timescales for the bar charts. So I'll make sure that next time that we either give you 3 years worth or 5 years worth of information. It's just that there's a lot of information, and I mean, these reports are quite long now anyway, so they would be even longer. But I'll take advice on that. But I take on board your comment about it. With regards to complaints from children and young people, I know what you're saying. It is concerning that we don't get complaints directly from children and young people. Social workers, they do let children and young people know that if they're not happy with any particular service, that they can complain. We have got leaflets for children, young people in age-friendly language that sets out what they can do if they want to make a complaint. You know, they can come directly to me, or they can discuss it with a social worker or a teacher or a friend who can raise issues on their behalf. But historically, you know, not just us in Monmouthshire, but across Wales, you'll find that we do not get many complaints directly from children, young people. And mainly because they can't be bothered with going through a formal process. If they've got an issue, they will raise it with either a social worker or a parent, a teacher, a friend, and they just want it sorted out then. You know, they don't want to meet with an investigating officer. They just want whatever their problem is sorted straight away. So therefore, you know, any issues they may have may be dealt with outside of the complaints procedure. And your point about exceeding the statutory time limits, I agree with what you're saying. However, we have a small pool of external investigating officers, because it has to be an external investigating officer. These people are used by other authorities in Wales, and so therefore, you know, they may have taken on a few complaints at a time. So that could be a factor why it's taking longer. And also it's because of the complexities of the case, where they have to do more research. It could well be that they need to go back to the complainant to find out more information. They need to interview staff. They need to come into our offices and inspect our files, our records, all of this, as well as then putting together a robust report. So yes, I would like to see the reports done in a more timely way, but that's some of the reasons why they are not done in a timely way.
Thank you. Back to Ian, please.
Yeah, thank you for those. And I think actually your comments about the children actually lead into my bigger issue, which is really, I mean, and it also relates to what the chair said about the focus of the report in terms of this committee. I see, as I'm looking in the report, lots of, in the comments section, I'm reading those comments, and for me, they sound like complaints. No OT has visited to assess me. You know, all these types of things. That's not a comment. I'm reading that as a complaint. And then so I'm bringing in this and thinking, actually, what is the purpose of this report coming to this particular committee? Because I believe that, you know, the Social Services Complaint Annual Report could be going to People's Scrutiny Committee. The Whole Authority one could be going to Place Scrutiny Committee to look at the nature of the complaints and our response to them. I think for this committee is what we need to be looking at is actually what is the framework with its working. And I know you have to work within the PSO model framework for looking at this, but I would be much more interested in thinking what is our overall strategy or framework or approach or whatever plan that we want, label you want to use it, for addressing complaints, but in a much broader context in terms of where does it fit in with the council's interactions with the public. So if I'm looking at some of these numbers, I'm thinking the numbers of reports that go through the My Monmouthshire app, for example, or get phoned in through the switchboard, or go into the council generic email address around issues around potholes, about flooding, about missed bin collections, as well as about some of the more social care or education issues. Those appear to be missing from this report. So if we're only looking at what's at the formal investigation stage, I don't think we're getting the context in which this is happening. So I suppose what I would be asking for is actually saying, is this committee is less interested in the narrative of those different examples and comments, more interested in what is the framework within which we're operating and what are the performance indicators we're looking at, and how does this all fit together. Because I do believe this, that threshold, what is that threshold between whatever a notification of a problem, a comment that's being made, when does that become classified as a complaint, and whose responsibility is it to make that, for it to cross that threshold? Is it the public's responsibility to say, actually, this is a complaint, or is it our responsibility to read it and say, actually, I think this is really a complaint, even if it's been addressed in very sort of passive language? And I think that's what we should be looking at really here, and seeing how that all fits together and how we're doing that, and also how we're following through. You mentioned that we want to learn from these complaints, but there's no sense in the report about the mechanisms for both how that is happening, but also how we're ensuring it has happened. And that's also what I think we should be looking at in terms of a governance and audit perspective. And sorry, that's quite forceful, but I think that's what we as a committee, our responsibilities need to be addressing.
So can I come in there? So thank you, Ian. Very eloquently explained. And that's not only Ian's view, it's certainly my view, and I think the view of the committee generally. So I suggest, rather than respond to that point at the moment, Annette, please take it away, and in conjunction with other officers, we need to think about how to address those observations. Okay, I think Ian's finished his questions and comments, so I'll pass now to Peter Strong, please.
Yeah, thank you, Annette. It was a really interesting report to read. It's useful that we've got the numbers for year-on-year comparison, but I'm just wondering if, as well as just the raw numbers, we should be looking at some sort of weighting system for complaints. You might, for example, in terms of the seriousness of the subject matter, you might, for example, have one complaint that's dealt with at stage 1, which raised a really important matter of safeguarding or health and safety. Another one, also dealt with at stage 1, that might be, I don't know, somebody in the middle of June complaining that no mow May has gone on too long and their grass hasn't yet been cut. Now, that complaint is important to that person, but it's still counted as one, whereas the more serious one is counted as one. And I'm just wondering if it would be useful or indeed possible to have some sort of weighting system in the report to show the level of seriousness of complaints, regardless at what level they're dealt with, at what stage they're dealt with.
Thank you. With regard to, if there were any issues with regard to safeguarding, that would be dealt with immediately, and that would be referred to social services and to the relevant manager, because safeguarding issues take priority over complaints anyway. I take on board what you say about the weighting system, and yes, I'll consider that.
Okay, thank you. Phil, did you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, only briefly. Annette, you've made a lot of references to reasons why things are delayed and things like that, but there's an overriding point here. All this information, even the very latest bit of it, is 12 months old. And if we're to look at the effectiveness of anything, it would be handy if it was a little bit more up to date and relevant. So, is that too much of an ask, or is it something we're working towards, bringing these reports earlier?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I'm going to step in there, right, Councillor Murphy, because a little bit of that delay is down to me. I'm the responsible head of service for this area, and Annette did actually produce this report significantly earlier for oversight by SLT. We had some sort of internal discussions around it. Some of this sort of linked to the issues around sort of the analysis of it. So actually, sort of people need to be looking at me in terms of the delay. But I have picked up that conversation with the chair as well, and we've agreed that certainly next time you see this, it will be far earlier in the year, because you're absolutely right. The important thing is learning and acting on this, and learning and acting on this in a timely manner. what I would say, and I know Annette will cover this in more detail if needed as well, is that each of these complaints is, I think, covered by an action plan which is shared with managers. The important thing for us organisationally is to learn as a whole organisation and not to see some of that learning sort of go off into silos. And it talks to Councillor Strong's point as well, really, about that sort of severity of the issue. Because actually, when you read this and you think about the analysis, you sort of understand where some of that sits. So it's not always easy to get across in a report. The important thing for us as this work develops and continues to develop is distilling out those key issues of greatest significance to the organisation and our residents, and ensuring that not just action plans sit with individual managers and departments, but we learn from those as a whole organisation. But yeah, I just wanted to step in there, but because I'm the person that should be feeling guilty around the tardiness of that report rather than it sitting with Annette.
Well, we'll save you having to respond then, Annette. We'll settle for Matt's response on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments come through. So just to conclude, I think we can note for paper, I want to thank Annette for her hard work in putting this paper together. It was very detailed, lots of information there, and it did give us some insights into the interactions with members of the public and service users. So thank you ever so much, Annette. Okay, I think we can now move on to item 8. Which is the Audit Wales Annual Audit Summary. I think this is for information only, but I will turn to Rachel Freitag and Charlotte Owen, and just in case they wanted to make any comments.
Yes, just for information only, it's our annual audit summary, which sets out the work that we completed during 2022. So both financial and performance work, and the committee will have already received the reports that are summarised in there. So just something to raise. I know it's come up with questions from members when we presented this previously. In the key fact section, we include some information on the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. I know members have raised concerns before because it sort of says there's no deprivation in Monmouthshire. So just to provide a little bit of context around that, we use the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation just because it provides some useful comparative data that we can put in these summaries, which go to all 22 councils, and it gives a snapshot of overall levels of deprivation in an area. But although none of the 10% most deprived areas in Wales are in Monmouthshire, we appreciate that does mask the fact that deprivation does exist within the county. So this year we've included a footnote, I think it's footnote 6, with a link to the Monmouthshire Wellbeing Assessment, which sort of assesses the situation in Monmouthshire in a bit more detail rather than just relying on the index of multiple deprivation. But yeah, I don't know if Rachel wants to add anything else, otherwise happy to take any questions.
Just to say, there's nothing for me. Thanks, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you for that helpful context. Questions or comments, please? No, I think we're content. So thank you both. In which case we shall move on to item 9. Item 9 is the overview of performance management arrangements. I believe this paper is going to be introduced by Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy, Performance and Scrutiny, ably supported by Hannah Carter, who stayed on to give Matt that cover he needs. So, Matthew, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And although I'm talking to this, most of this work is done by others, including Hannah, who's been with us for, I think, a very relatively short period of time as our graduate performance analyst, but has quickly sort of settled into the organisation and brings a really valuable perspective to this work. So the report before you today is to give the committee an overview of the effectiveness of the authority's performance management arrangements. It breaks it down within the appendix into a number of different areas, which are, I won't go into detail, but I will just sort of touch upon briefly and highlight a couple of issues for the benefits of the the committee. So Appendix 2 just gives you an overview of the framework itself, the different elements which you'd expect to see in any large organisation, from high-level strategy through to sort of individual objectives and sort of how that's sort of implemented and translated throughout the whole of the organisation. We've had quite a number of changes to the performance framework in recent years. Again, I won't dwell on the detail, but basically the Local Government and Elections Act 2021 changed the way in which performance management in Wales in public bodies is carried out. And that was incredibly beneficial because it's brought greater alignment with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So now a lot of our performance is sort of assessed and looked at in the context of our wellbeing objectives, which are a legal requirement for public bodies to set under that act. But I'll return to that in a moment, because that probably is one of the areas I need to highlight. So the sort of appendix to the report just runs through the different elements in the framework and gives a sort of narrative verdict. Now, one of the things that's important to say is that that is done by officers. That is our assessment of the effectiveness of these arrangements. One of the checks and balances in that is actually the view of this committee and the view of councillors, because you may look at this judgment, and it's the important thing you bring it to you, and say, actually, based on our observation, based on either what we've seen or what we can see here, we don't feel that judgment is accurate. So if there are issues in this as a committee that you're not satisfied, then accordingly we adjust that judgment. And equally, we take into account the work and findings of external regulators, people like Audit Wales. So for example, I think we'll touch upon it later on. One of the pieces of work that Audit Wales will undertake shortly is looking at our performance management or performance data arrangements. Now, in conversation with Charlotte and Rachel, they've spelled out to me one of the reasons they're doing that is they haven't highlighted a particular risk, but actually it's a long time, or it's a number of years since they've done that piece of work. So it's important for them to refresh their evidence base. And when that happens, we sort of reflect those findings in this overall study. So yes, it's our judgment, but it's also supplemented by external evidence from others that comes forward. So I'll just sort of highlight a couple of things. So the first thing here in the green is the well-being objectives. Those legally have to be set by council. We do that. Our decision constitutionally is they're wrapped up within the community and corporate plan, which is part of the council's constitution. So as all council members will be aware, and I mentioned earlier, that hasn't gone through council yet. Fingers crossed we'll get that through fairly soon. A lot of work is underway on that at the moment, and engagement across political groups to ensure that happens. But that will set the well-being objectives. So you'll see a bit of a reflection in there that although those objectives have been endorsed by Cabinet, they are not yet our legally binding objectives. Strictly speaking, the legally binding well-being objectives of this organisation remain that set by the previous administration back in 2017 and refreshed in 2019. I'll stop my input there because this is an apolitical meeting. But just in terms of the practicalities of that, so that's sort of the well-being objectives. We then have our service business plans. So all of the teams, and they're clustered in slightly different ways, has a business plan that translates the objectives of the organisation into individual or the actions undertaken by each team. Now, this is probably the one area that I would highlight in this report that is falling short of where it should be at the moment. The quality and timeliness of the production of those service business plans. Now, if we look at the current moment, a little bit of that is tied up in the delay in the approval of the wellbeing objectives, because as teams look to write their plans for the coming year, 23-24, they do so by looking at the wellbeing objectives. So kind of a little bit, people are sort of partly on hold in finishing the plans because they're waiting for that to be endorsed by council. But notwithstanding that issue, we do have more work to do in assuring that the quality of those plans and the team we produce a set of principles that people write against, but then the team sort of look at these and do a sort of quality assurance exercise. Are they doing what they should do? Are they being produced on time? Are they being updated? And so just sort of highlighting, this sets out that actually some of that isn't where it needs to be at the moment, and that's something we'll be have a particular sort of push on, particularly once the community and corporate plan is passed. But just to ensure that there's a bit of transparency on that, and all of these service business plans are available to councillors on the hub. So anyone that wants to look in there can do and can look at individual team plans. The other thing to sort of highlight there is occasionally we will say in one of these reports, things like risk management, there's an element of that work that sits at a service business plan level. So actually certain things sit at a whole authority risk register, certain things sit at a service business plan level. Self-evaluation, we did it for the first time last year. It's a requirement under the Local Government and Elections Act that each year we undertake self-evaluation. We do so against our well-being objectives. We're sort of exploring how we do that this year, given the situation we're in. But it was an interesting situation in October of last year when the leader had to sort of step up and present an evaluation report showing progress against the objectives of the previous administration. So that sort of should only happen once every 5 years, I imagine, with elections in May and these reports falling in June. But just one of the oddities that this throws up. First time we've done it. We've got some learning points from last year that we'll be building on in terms of this year's process, and that actually sort of gets underway in the coming weeks through desk-based production of core evidence, and then a series of workshops held sort of at directorate level, and then that work is available for scrutiny at Performance and Overview Committee before going through to decision at full council. So all members have the opportunity to be involved in and shape that self-evaluation. Performance data and information I mentioned briefly. We don't have national performance indicators anymore. This is something that we used to have a lot of. Councillor Murphy, Councillor Easton, you've been in this world a long time. You remember the days of national PIs and NORPs and various things. This is a lot more sort of localised now. And actually, I think then it's important for us to take that view of the Audit Wales work that will be done in this field, because there are a lot less standardised definitions around measures and a lot more sort of local discretion on this. But again, there'll be a significant amount of work. Well, it's actually been undertaken at the moment by Hannah and other colleagues in the data team, sort of looking at these measures, the target setting for them, and members will see more of that in the coming months. And then the final piece in this report is strategic risk management, which I won't dwell too much on here because that is a sort of substantive report later on the agenda. But this sort of just gives the overview of the activity under the strategic risk register. And again, I know from sort of discussions with the chair as well, we've probably got sort of further conversations coming on that report in terms of whether the way in which we're producing that information gives the committee the information it needs to effectively sort of discharge its responsibilities. But I'll sort of pause on that one because that's probably a broader discussion for both later in the agenda and future conversations.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful introduction. If I may, just want to pick up on a couple of points. So you talked about the self-evaluation process, which is kicking off in the next few weeks. And I think you said members will be able to engage with that process. And I took it that you meant elected members. Maybe could I check my assumption that is correct? And if so, how do lay members engage with that process, please?
I think you raise a very good point, and I don't have a perfect answer for that one. Yes, I think I was primarily talking about elected members. I'd have to check, and if Richard Jones was here, he'd give the perfect textbook answer to this, I am sure, because off the top of my head, I can't recall our engagement point with this committee. So I'll have to come back and check that one with you. But if we don't have an engagement point with this committee, then, you know, obviously that's a point that we need to reflect on and build in. There we go. Hannah is going to bail me out.
So the self-assessment report will come to this committee. It's a part of the requirement of the Local Government Elections Act that it does go to Governance and Audit Committee, and then we take it to performance and overview for a further scrutiny. So it will come to both committees.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I suppose my follow-up question or comment is about timeliness and what our engagement with that activity actually is. So my preference would be is that this committee is involved to design that self-evaluation process. As you mentioned, Matt, self-evaluation has a number of judgments applied right throughout the process. And I think this committee has an important role to play in terms of understanding what that process looks like, how biases and subjective judgments are applied and controlled during the course of that process. But recognising Richard's not here to maybe sort of give the textbook answer, maybe you could take that away and just think about how this committee should engage with it. You know, so recognising Hannah's point about we will see the draft report, I'm more interested in this committee understanding a process to be followed so we can interject at a more timely point. But I'll leave that for the moment. And if I may continue by just picking up on the cover paper, and I think this is implicit in what you said. I'm looking at the cover paper and trying to see a conclusion. I think you're telling us that the overall performance management arrangements are largely effective, but noting some areas for improvement. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, I would agree with that assessment.
Okay, and my final point, and you yet again, you mentioned this when you introduced the paper. Who's signed off these assessments? So I'm looking for a senior officer which stands behind these assessments. Is that you or another?
No, so the senior officer that stands behind these is myself. So as sort of head of service and a member of the council's strategic leadership team, it's sort of my responsibility to ensure that this is a robust process and complies with the expectations of the local government elections measure. But obviously incredibly appreciative of the efforts of this committee, given one of those important sort of perspectives and degrees of challenge into it as well.
Great, thank you. That was the answer I expected, and so thank you for doing that. We'll now go to the floor. Start off with Phil Murphy, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And yeah, Matt, I agree with you, particularly on the service business plans. We've never been any good at that. It's not necessarily anything to do with the impending adoption of the corporate plan. When I was on the cabinet, part of my responsibilities to the leader was to, on a quarterly basis, go through the posts to see who'd done their quarterly reports on the business plans. There were certain ones that were always behind, and I used to go and see Richard, and Richard would kick them, and lo and behold, they would appear. So I think that's a problem we've had for a long, long time. And quite how you're going to solve it, I don't know. But if you look back, you'll see, if you're not already aware, you probably are the ones who don't ordinarily stick them on there unless they're kicked. So that's just a little pointer for you.
Great, thanks, Phil. Over to Ian Chandler, please.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a couple. I'm just following up on the service business plans. And yeah, taking what you've just said about sometimes they're not being done, but even making sure they're not just paper exercises that are then put in a filing cabinet. And I suppose my concern is having trawled extensively through all of the budget papers and the proposals from department heads in terms of savings proposals, some of those, and I'm thinking particularly the ones in the social health and social care team directorate, actually involve quite substantial service delivery changes, so changes in the way that services are delivered. So, and yet your paper here is talking about, yeah, well, the last one of these was done in quarter, whenever it was, and I think, well, actually, it's not any reference to that. So I suppose what I want to understand is how are these sort of maybe, long, medium-term service business plans actually relate to the updated business plans that have come as a result of budgetary pressures that have actually involved some level of service transformation, because it just seems there's quite disconnect there. I mean, it makes me wonder that what's in your paper is actually just a tick box exercise and the real work's happening in the budgets. So that was my first question. And I suppose my second question really is about, well, it's about the data and it's also about the self-assessment. I suppose for me, the self-assessment is not just about a group of officers sitting around a table thinking, well, how do we think we're doing? It's about actually drawing in the available data. And so that data section comes in for me. So that performance data and information, I suppose there's a couple of areas in that. One is, I don't see a huge amount in there that actually is about data that's coming from users, from service users, or from the public or from residents, and just how is our self-evaluation being informed by what our residents in the county are actually saying and experiencing. But also just in that, at a more technical level within that performance data, I suppose I would like to get a bit more of a sense about how we are looking at different types of performance indicator. So from a technical point of view, are we, to categorize different types of performance indicators, so we've got a sense of, are we triangulating our findings appropriately? So are we looking at, sort of clear impact assessments? Are we looking at process indicators to say we're doing what we said we would do, whether it's achieving anything or not? Are we looking at proxy indicators that might demonstrate an impact if we're not able to measure that impact directly? I think we just need to have a little bit more technical oomph in that gives us a bit more of a framework by which we have confidence in the performance indicators, and then taking that to the self-assessment side, actually looking at that self-assessment, how are we in that self-assessment using that various forms of data to triangulate our own self-assessment rather than just being opinions of officers who obviously have a vested interest in saying that we're doing really great.
Yeah, thanks very much, and yeah, thanks for the questions. It's always interesting as an officer when your committee members include experts in the fields and management consultants, because you always get a good quality of question back, and we're always quite appreciative of that. And I think on the first point, are the plans the real plans? If you look at those service business plans at the moment, today you left this meeting and clicked on one, you would not see in the vast majority of them the detail yet of how those savings proposals will be implemented. That detail will emerge as the plans for the new year are shaped up, but in a lot of instances it will say, implement action plan 4, rather than a wealth of detail sitting in that service business plan, because inevitably change management programs will require much more significant detail than would fit into a service business plan. Because one of the things we want to do with these, so a bit like the earlier point, is they're a sort of high-level oversight of how a team is doing what it's doing that give people a route in, but they don't give every single detail around delivery. So they will often signpost. But just to be clear, if you look now, you'd have to look elsewhere to see the detail of delivery. And at the moment, a lot of what's happening is laying the groundwork around those savings. So I know, for example, in my area, and regrettably, we've had to make some staffing reductions in order to deliver the budget savings, and I'm involved in both formal and informal discussions with staff, with trade unions, and so on to progress those. So once we're through that, then you get into the implementation of the service changes, and you start to see the footprint of that, or the breadcrumb trail of that through the service business plans. And then you sort of the second question was around the self-evaluation, the data we have available, and you sort of majored in, I think, significantly as well then on the service user data. So I'll sort of come to that, then work back out. So the service user data is quite varied. We're very lucky at the high level that we now benefit from the National Survey for Wales, which is, I think, sort of coordinated through Welsh Government. So that is analysed down to local authority level. So questions like, do you feel able to influence decisions in your local area? Down to things like people eating 3 or more fruit and veg a day or exercising daily. So the level of question that we often see in things like the national census. So that gives us a wide range of measures, and some of those are about local services. So we draw on those, and it's a reasonable sample size at local level that give us some sort of reasonable measures. Then individual services will do some of their own service questionnaires. So, for example, I'm responsible for libraries. So Cheryl Haskell's our strategic library lead. Over the last, I think it closed on the weekend, we had a library customer service survey, which we sort of pushed out on social media with press releases and so on. So we gather information there about how effective people think that service is, which we use to compare with others, but also sort of track our own progress. But not all services have that sort of level of information. We don't have, historically, this organisation sort of did subscribe and do whole household surveys through organisations like Ipsos Mori. We have sort of moved away from that a number of years ago. It wasn't, I mean, I wouldn't be able to go back to the precise reason why those were discontinued, but it was something that, relative to the financial cost, we weren't getting the value back from them. So the decision was to use more of the localized information. So I think the point made, it is there in some places, but it's not throughout the whole organisation. And then we tend to have the broader coverage through the national survey stuff, which doesn't tend to be as specific on some of the local issues. But all of that sort of information is available then, and we use as part of the desk-based approach in producing the sort of initial input that goes into the workshops for the self-evaluation. And yeah, I think you also make an important point around the different mix of indicators and triangulating them. Your input, your output, all of these different things alongside the sort of the report that Annette has introduced. We might have one measure saying we're really good at it, or we complete 100% on time. But if we're getting a high number of complaints, then we might be very quick, but we're not very good. So we do have to put all of this together, and that's actually one of the things we need to ensure we do through the self-assessment exercise, is bring all of these different evidence sources into one place and triangulate them, so that we're able, through a lot of different lenses and perspective, to hopefully arrive at something which is a sort of reasonable approximation of the truth that the majority of people, whether they be members of the public, councillors or officers, would recognise as the reality of our service offer. Hannah, I don't know if there's anything you want to sort of add in on either of those points.
Just to come in on the comment you made on people using completing service plans as almost a tick box exercise, I think that was something doing the quality assurance that we did find, and this is where the quality assurance has come in handy, and it's actually really helpful for a lot of those completing the service plans. So I think some of the feedback that we had, well, I had when speaking to those people, was that they almost weren't sure how to use the service plans, and I think the quality assurance is giving some comments and some guidance on leading them from using it as almost a form to fill in and more of a planning exercise. And so from the top of my head, I think there are a few that use that as a good planning tool. So building control, Modern Life, they really utilise the service plans, and that's what we want the others to follow, and use it more as a forward-looking mechanism rather than filling it at the end of a quarter, the end of a year. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's really encouraging to hear that it's just looking at it as a process rather than as a form, because I'm much more reassured to hear that. If I just come back on the data issue, and I suppose it's only a comment really. Obviously, if we're just relying on what data is already available, there's that adage that what you measure becomes important, and it should be the other way around. Is what's important should be what you measure, and as that we need to be very clear about what it is we want to measure, rather than just relying on the data that just happens to be available. But that's fine. I'll just leave that as a comment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we're done. So thank you for the paper. We can note it and move on. So we're moving on to item 10, which is the review of the strategic risk register. And patterns emerging here. It's back to Matt and Hannah. So over to you, please.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chair. So okay, the report before you is something which is received regularly by this committee and its predecessor. There is a requirement for it to be received by this committee. The intention of bringing it to you is to enable this committee to seek assurance about the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements and the way in which those are discharged. Again, I think it's an important point as we move through this. We're really open to views around whether the report, the way in which it's structured, allows you to effectively fulfil that responsibility. There is a huge breadth of information within this report, and it's also something which is of interest to scrutiny committees and to the performance and overview scrutiny committees, because there are points of detail in here that, while you will look at them and take a view about whether we are effectively managing our risks, there may be points of detail that need to sit with other committees for further scrutiny, because they relate to services which they examine in more detail. And it's important to sort of, as we do have that sort of effective working relationship between committees, to ensure that the oversight of these things sits in the most appropriate place and where it can make the most significant difference. So again, I sort of won't run through the entirety of the report, but we have a risk management policy. There's a very sort of brief overview of that, which is attached as an appendix to this report. And I think probably the significance of that for anyone listening in at home or is new to this, if you sort of scroll to the end of this document, you see a sort of a 4x4 grid that does red, amber, green, high, medium, and low. And the significance of that being that any risk rating is made up of the likelihood of something happening and the severity of the consequences if it does happen. And actually, quite often, the things which we are able to affect are the likelihood of something happening. Can we make something, a poor outcome, less likely? But of course, in some instances, you can affect the severity of the consequences. I can hopefully make it less likely that my children fell off their bike by teaching them to cycle properly, but in the event they do, they wear a helmet, so the eventual consequences if they do fall off and bash their head are lesser. So when we present these tables, we just give the overall high, medium, and low, but it's sort of underpinned by those judgments around sort of consequences and likelihood. So there's a sort of an overlap here. You'll see a repetition of what you saw in the overview performance management arrangements in part one, the self-assessment of the risk framework, which sets out how well we believe we do this. And then you also see in part one of this report, the overview of the current strategic risk sat on the authority's risk log. Just to stress, this is the overview and summary of the key changes since the last time this report came to the committee. The full live risk log is sort of updated on a regular basis and is available on the hubs. So any member of this committee can click on that at any point, and it's sort of periodically updated through through the year. Probably key things in terms of additions this time, just to draw your attention to, is risk 14, which is about limited funding for public transport and more stringent tests around road building, sort of creating, sort of making it harder for people to potentially travel around the county. And we've sort of also made an addition to the risk around homelessness, the lack of availability of suitable accommodation in the county, which reflects some of the sort of the migration trends we've seen recently, and in particular, the number of sort of Ukrainians which we've been able to welcome as a county who fled the war in Russia. And that reflects some of the challenges which they face, and which mirror, I think, and echo that felt by our sort of local population in finding a sort of suitable supply of affordable accommodation. You know, we know it's not easy for any young family in this county with property prices and rent levels. So just sort of draw your attention to those sort of particular issues which are added into the risk register. What we would say as well, and it ties back to the previous point, these are the strategic high-level risks facing, or high and medium-level risks facing the authority. This risk register doesn't purport to cover everything, and the process of production is, it's sort of a two-way stage. We have risks escalating or bubbling up through service business plans and individual teams. Those are sort of looked at by sort of strategic leadership team heads of service. Some of them sort of make the cut, as it were, for the strategic risk register, because they have organisational significance. And we say, actually, that risk is so big, it can't be effectively managed at the level of an individual team or manager. This needs to be on our radar as a whole organisation. It needs to be on Cabinet's radar. It needs to be on, the radar of committees. It needs to be on the radar of strategic leadership teams. And that's sort of the information that comes forth as part of this document. There are other risks which either permanently sit at the level of an individual team. They will tend to be more operational, or things which we're confident can be managed at the level of the team manager, with sort of occasional input oversight from directorate management teams or heads of service. And that's sort of a process really of adjustment. A team may say, well, actually, this is a really high risk. But when you look at it at an SLT or a strategic level, actually, it might be high risk for that team, but in the context of the whole organisation, it's not something which needs to sit and be held at this level. The other risk which or the other issue the paper refers to is the potential to develop a community risk register. And there's something called a community risk register does exist under civil contingencies legislation. It sits with local resilience forums, where we come together with other local authorities and the blue light services on a sort of Gwent footprint to look at sort of civil contingencies, emergencies. Our response if something horrible were to happen, and we do sort of major incident tests and so on. So this could be something like a rail derailment in the area, or a chemical spillage. What we're sort of interested in exploring with the idea of a community risk register is those sort of risks, situations, or mega trends that might be existing at a sort of global level, which aren't directly related to our organisation, but actually as sort of local, as custodians of our local area and stewards of this place of Monmouthshire, we need to be cited on, because they could have a significant future impact on our residents. I'm saying some of this knowing that there's an expert sat behind me, because we had a little exchange of this online, and the chair has sort of been very involved in this work. But and I'm sort of dipping my toes in the water of this for the first time. But actually, issues such as sort of artificial intelligence, climate change, what do these mean for our county and its population? They're not necessarily immediately organisational issues, but they could be of organisational significance. So what the paper sets out is an additional recommendation for a group known as Monmouthshire Programme Board, which is where the public service partners come together. It sits under the Public Services Board. And we have representatives of police, fire and rescue, local housing associations sat on that, to task that group with producing a broader community risk register. But in the first instance, to look at and explore the feasibility of whether this would genuinely add value to the county over and above the things which already exist, our strategic risk register as an organisation, and the community risk register that sits at LRF level. So, again, Hannah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add into to that. I'm not sure it's an appropriate question, but Chair, given your past experience in this, whether there's anything you want to add, or it may come out over the course of the debate, but if not, certainly we're looking to tap into your knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you for a very comprehensive introduction. We'll go to questions and then circle back maybe to our point. Start off with Colin Prosser, please.
Yes, Chair. So this was a question I sort of want to ask during the meeting from the start, really, which is just sort of dawned on me, is with the shared resource service for IT, which we have, and I'm involved in this in another organisation that uses that there are a number of standalone systems that sit inside that firewall. And just whether we have a strategic overview of that, because obviously, you know, and that's going from ISA 315, which we start at the start of the meeting. I won't say that now, but really it's all aspects of what we do and what we're trying to achieve here. And being a shared resource service, there's compromises and limitations in what you can achieve with that, which I find in my daily work, with the ability to some things that SRS can handle for you and some things that they can't, and the risk of those systems, existing within that firewall. And I would have thought there are many across Monmouthshire County Council that we have to assess and risk to put into that strategic plan.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll start off, and I'm not sure if it may be something that Peter Davis also wants to input on, because he has sort of overview and oversight responsibility around our IT services through SRS. But yes, it's a really key point. We're so dependent on these systems at the moment. Obviously, we're in the SRS arrangement with a number of other authorities, and that has over time proved sort of an effective, or certainly a cost-effective way to get access to a broad range of support skills that we would probably struggle to afford as a single organisation in terms of that specialism. But of course, there is always a risk of trade-off. We do hold a systems register, which sort of sits with Sean Hayward as the relevant head of service there, who meets regularly with sort of SRS to ensure that appropriate testing is undertaken. And of course, the other element to that, and probably one of the things that is sort of, I'm not sure whether we describe it as a mega trend, but one of those huge societal threats that sits on our radar is the constant risk of cyber attack. And we have seen that affecting other public bodies, and the unfortunate position of sort of ransomware and other activities going on. So, as an example, that's one of the things we've strengthened fairly sort of significantly in the last 18 months by sort of bringing in our own sort of specialist cybersecurity expert, who I think a number of officers around the county will attest is frequently sort of probing and testing our systems, in addition to that work done by SRS to ensure we sort of limit our own vulnerability to cyber attack, and looking at any potential sort of backdoors that could place additional pressures and risks on our system.
So I was just going to come back and say, and also around the effectiveness of those systems for use in the audit processes. That we are the problem that we're dealing with is the actual problem, as opposed to the inaccuracy of the data that we've received. which, you know, I assume now with ISA 315 that we'll be looking for more accuracy with that, which the council is going to have to sort of raise the bar and then sort of try and address those with those individual systems.
Yeah, and again, I'd probably have to sort of not an area of huge knowledge for me in terms of the standards applied to those. So, you know, I probably need to sort of come back and get a bit more detail in terms of the reassurance around that, because it's not something I have a sort of intricate level of knowledge of. But I know that Peter Davis is on the call, and there may be something there which Pete is able to add to answer that a little more fully.
Yeah, as if by magic. Peter, did you want to come in at that point, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Matt, who admirably covered off a significant proportion of the query. So I just, and apologies, I was listening intently, I promise, but clearly there was matters of the report that were slightly away from my portfolio. Just so I cover the specificity of the query, could the question just be simply be repeated, and then I'll come off the back of Matt's input and cover that, if that's okay.
Yes, Peter. It was just generally around the cybersecurity for all the legacy systems that the council has to use. The relationship, it's only a small question, the relationship with SRS, and then with the ISA 315 requirement, you know, how the council is going to raise the bar to meet that and ensure that the data that we're supplying is accurate and meeting the audit requirement.
Okay. So probably just to extend from Matt's input and just to add to it. So we have an independent security team, which is a collaborative one, as Matt's attested to, headed up by Cathy Buckley. And Cathy's been here recently with Sian to talk to the our cyber security arrangements. And obviously she maintains and operates that level of independent oversight, regardless in a way from the SRS. But you know, part of the role of that security team is to actually hold the SRS to account in terms of their arrangements as well. Furthermore, and in terms of within the SRS, and picked up as a specific point, I think, and will come through and offer a wider opportunity for discussion, I think, in time for the committee. Point on the action list there around internal audit program for the SRS. Just coincidentally, for example, one element of the cybersecurity arrangements has just received a full assurance audit. I had that email through earlier today, which is obviously great to see, and a testament to the work that's been done both by the SRS and in fact by the security team in working very closely with them. But it's a demonstration, hopefully, to the question as to how we maintain proper oversight and in terms of the robustness of the arrangements. And I think, as I said, that will be opened up a little bit more fully in time for the committee. In terms of the matter, in terms of the enhanced requirements that are coming our way, and again, Rachel talked earlier on to you know, the requirements that are coming and are placing some additional burdens on audit and upon us. It's one of the points I specifically raised with our engagement lead with Audit Wales when I met with her for the first time last week, to seek actual, you know, some upfront clarification in terms of you know, what that additional burden looks and feels like, because I'd like to be proactive rather than reactive to that. So that we can make sure that we're suitably and well prepared in providing Audit Wales with the information that they require. But I think to the question that's actually being asked, and it's in terms of making sure that you know, the arrangements that we have that are good, but they're not perfect. And I'm not talking here about the security arrangements. I'm talking more so in terms of I guess, talking across to Matt, and the point of clean data, but the interoperability of our systems, the way that data flows through our systems from end to end, and making sure from a data quality perspective that we're getting to sort of one version of the truth, so to speak, in and through our systems, and that is an ongoing piece of work. Because of the nature of local authority and the complexity of probably about 80 to 100 core systems that operate and carry data and information through them. But clearly, and I think it's welcomed, if a lens that is being applied by Audit Wales identifies, specific further areas for improvement, then clearly we work constructively with the audit process to drive those changes as much as we're doing anyway. So hopefully that's helpful further input.
Great, thank you. Let's move to Tony Eason, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's risk 4, where a decision was taken 6 months ago to support commission care by £1 an hour, for example. That ends today. Unless I missed something, that risk will still be there tomorrow. Are there any plans in place to continue that, supporting that risk?
Apologies for the delay, Chair. Yeah, I'm just sort of looking into that sort of point of detail and reminding myself of the situation with that one. As I hope members can appreciate, when we have a report of this breadth, there's quite a bit of detail and a number of officers involved in producing it.
If easier, you could take that away, Matt, and can come back offline if easier for you.
Yeah, I may have to do that, I'm afraid, Councillor Eason. But I think my recollection is that we are looking to extend that scheme. But rather than taking that as read, can I just check that and come back and confirm that to you in writing? Yeah.
Okay. Doesn't appear to be any further questions or comments, so let's conclude this item. So, as Matt indicated a few minutes ago, we've had email exchange, in particular to two matters. The first was in relation to refining the structure and contents of this paper to ensure it's more fully aligned to the responsibilities of this committee. So I'll take that work forward with relevant officers. Matt then did talk us through the recommendation shown as at 2.2 on the cover paper. And personally, that's in respect to the Community Risk Register, I'm very supportive of that development. I'm not hearing anyone objecting to that, so that recommendation, I think, is endorsed by this committee, and look forward to seeing the output of that work in due course. Okay. If we could then, let's move on to item 11. Item 11 is the implementation of internal audit agreed recommendations. As this committee knows, this is Andy Woffin's last meeting of the Governance Audit Committee. He'll be sadly missed. So what I'd like to do is ask Andy to talk to the paper, highlighting key points of note, and then if it is still appropriate, I'd like then Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, to come in and talk about Andy's replacement, noting, of course, that Andy is totally irreplaceable. Okay. So please, to begin with, over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report in terms of the implementation of agreed audit recommendations for finalised reports in 21-22 from an internal audit perspective. And it's been presented to Governance and Audit Committee this afternoon, where members are asked to consider the report, identify any concerns of non-implementation of our audit recommendations, and where appropriate, consider requesting further explanations from operational service managers as to why the implementation of actions has not been as productive as expected. So just to set the scene, Chair, in terms of the public sector internal audit standards, I've got a responsibility to comply with all of those standards in delivering the internal audit service within Monmouthshire. As part of that, I have to provide an overall opinion on the assurance and the adequacy of internal control, governance and risk management processes. And in order to do that, we have an audit plan which incorporates a number of audit jobs. Each audit job has an opinion associated to it, and we arrive at those opinions by identifying strengths or weaknesses against expected controls which should be in place in the service in which we're auditing. So where we come across weaknesses, then generally we would implement or include an audit recommendation within the action plan of the individual report, with the intention of improving the service area delivery or improving controls around better financial stewardship. So where we make the recommendation, the crux of it really is for service managers to actually implement that recommendation. So for 21-22 finalised reports, where we've agreed the actions with individual service managers and collated that information, we've got 98% of all our recommendations have been agreed by operational managers. So another requirement of the standards is that I also have to make sure that those are implemented. This time around for 21-22, we circulated information to service managers and they responded to us, and we had a caveat that we could still go in and do a sample check of the recommendations that they said had been implemented, just to give ourselves some assurance that that had happened. And just to make members aware that where we do have a limited assurance, which is our lower end of opinion, the audit team would go in and do a follow-up audit within 6 months to provide better assurance that things had been improved and implemented. So in terms of the actual implementation for 21-22, there is a gap of agreed recommendations to those implemented. The recommendations implemented or partially implemented amounts to 76%, where the actual recommendations agreed and accepted by service managers is 98%. That said, that is a slight improvement on where we've been in the last couple of years, as shown in the table in 3.13. So no major issues, Chair, as far as we're concerned. There does need to be a better implementation of agreed recommendations, but we will be following that up in the work we continue in terms of the audit planning process moving forward into 23-24. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful introduction. I think I did read somewhere in your paper that under 3.15, you've taken this information to the SLT. Were the SLT supportive, and were they then encouraging their sort of managers to adopt these recommendations?
Yes, Chair, the feedback has been very positive. Chief officers have taken that on board, taken it through to their DMTs, and they're supportive of the audit report, and they've implied on their service managers that the seriousness of the audit report and impressed on them to implement those recommendations.
Okay, that sounds really positive. Is there anything in particular you want this committee to do to further encourage that good progress?
Not specifically, Chair. I think we can, the one point would be to probably report back in 6 months to see where we are rather than a 12-month update, just to make sure that we've closed all the gaps and given service managers an opportunity to actually implement the recommendations as agreed. In terms of the audit plan, we're continuing to do that moving forward into 23-24. We'll continue to make audit recommendations in the reports that we make. And where we are against the 22-23 plan, we're likely to achieve around 70% of the agreed plan for 22-23.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go to questions and comments and then circle back to Peter Davis. Rodri Guest, please.
Thanks, Chair. Andy's partly answered my question via yours. I just noted on the table, obviously it says that this year there's a 98% percentage of recommendations accepted by managers. and obviously 60% have been implemented and then another 16 partially. And then obviously there's a table at 3.13 as well about historically. So I was just wondering how satisfied you are with that implementation rate, and you know, is there anything that we can done to ensure that managers are implementing the recommendations? Because obviously 98% of recommendations being accepted is highlighting the added worth, the added value of the team, but that's not necessarily reflected in how it's been implemented.
Thank you. Yeah, ideally we'd like all recommendations to be implemented, so 98%. As the Chair's mentioned in the report, we've escalated this to SLT, supported by Pete Davis and supported by the Chief Officers. They then are pressing on their DMTs, their service managers, to make sure that those recommendations are implemented. We'll continue to bang the drum on that one and feed into SLT and to get feedback, and working our way through the audit plan and the relationships we develop with our service managers. We'll be imposing the importance of continually implementing those recommendations.
Thank you. Move to Phil Murphy, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Andy's point about getting a report back in 6 months is probably right. 17% who haven't implemented yet, although they intend to, needs following up on.
Agreed. Thank you. Any further questions or comments from members? Not seeing any. Okay, in that case, Peter Davis, are you able to give an update as far as possible on Andy's replacement, please, and the plans in place?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think before I get to that, there's probably, whilst I've got the floor, there's probably 3 points to make. Firstly, just to probably echo, I guess, the sentiments of the committee and Andrew himself, you know, that the importance of, you know, the internal audit process carrying itself through recommendations being agreed, and then clearly those recommendations being implemented. And Andrew will know, because it's been part of discussion that we've been having in recent times, and a piece of work that's in train but not complete yet. But where where we are wanting to strengthen some of the systems, I guess, some of the automation and the workflow, so that when there is a baton transfer, once we get an internal audit report finalised and agreed, there is good and robust mechanisms for those recommendations to land with the responsible officers, but for there to be a continued line of sight, not just by internal audit, but actually by line management as well, chief officer, etc. So, you know, that is work that we want to look to bring about, such as to, you know, I think it's an unfair expectation, really, year on year, for internal audit with the level of capacity that they've got to be continually chasing managers. There's got to be a level of responsibility carried here, and equally that's shared with chief officers and heads of service to make sure that progress is being made. So that's point one. Second point, to the specifics of your question and update request, Chair. So as you'd naturally expect, and I think I've touched on in previous meeting where the committee was aware that obviously Andrew was looking to leave the council, we are continuing to explore options in terms of the future for the internal audit team, and be quite open and transparent about that in terms of looking to explore wider collaborations. And some of those, those conversations are in train as we stand at the moment. I think the high likelihood is that us looking to evolve, I guess, the current collaboration that we have with Andrew as a shared chief internal auditor post across the internal audit teams from Monmouthshire and Newport. I think our ability to be able to, almost, in the blink of an eye, extend ourselves into sort of a wider or deeper collaboration elsewhere. That's not going to happen immediately. And I think if I was going to probably put a realistic lens on that, and there's obviously clearly a robust process that needs to be gone through, and assurances that would need to be provided to you, Chair, and the Governance and Audit Committee in terms of a direction of travel and taken. So, that process, arguably, I think, and any consideration around a wider collaboration, I think that's something that probably is for an implementation of probably next April rather than during the current year. I've been very open and transparent with the internal audit team, as Andrew well knows, in terms of sort of discussing my thoughts, and they're very much understanding and on board in terms of what we're looking to actively consider. There's an equal part here in terms of with I guess with every challenge, with a massive loss of expertise in Andrew going, it brings an opportunity to I guess explore options at the same time, and that's what we're looking to do. Resilience is very important for us, I think. I'm not of the mind, and to echo Andrew's thanks, the committee's actions that led to that senior audit post being retained within the team. That was important, and we've got to get the team on an interim basis on a secure footing. So as Andrew said, Jan is joining us now on the 24th of April as an audit manager. Within the rest of the team, I guess we've got good level of experience and sort of continuity of that experience. Notwithstanding that, there needs to be some expediency in terms of recruiting into that senior auditor post. In terms of the chief internal auditor role, I don't think that calling upon the existing Newport arrangement is going to be something that is going to be realistically available to us. They have probably more significant challenges at their end in terms of vacant posts, and I'm not saying it would be an unfair ask if I really pushed on the shared chief internal auditor role in terms of putting it upon Newport to honour that. I just don't really see that being as a realistic, immediate sort of outcome for us. So we are in discussion, myself and Andrew, with Jan, with the team in an inclusive way, and to look at what we could potentially look to do by way of a set of interim arrangements. That is, the collaborations that I've talked to, the options that we're exploring. One of those options is looking at whether I can maybe abuse Andrew's position in his new role, and understand as to whether he can in part look to offer some light touch mentoring support and guidance back in. I don't mind saying that publicly, and it's a conversation that's in train at the minute, and let's see where that will get me to. I'm not breaching confidences, really, Andrew. I don't think Andy in doing so. And if that comes to fruition, that's great. But I think we will have to take a bit of an opportunity here and it's been a conversation we've had with the team in terms of maybe acting up and taking on some additional responsibility. It is the proverbial bootstrap, I guess, because I think you can probably understand that if our direction of travel is to maybe explore more permanent and wider collaboration, the likelihood of us filling a 0.5 full-time chief internal auditor role is going to be quite difficult for that interim short period. So we need to probably risk assess and understand and explore and pursue the options that are available to us. So it's probably as far as I can go at the moment, Chair. Happy for Andrew, I guess, to offer his own perspective and comment as needed. I'm not sure if he wants to or not. I'll even just pause for a moment before I go into my final point.
I've got nothing to add to that, Pete. It's moving forwards. We've got a senior manager coming on board, an audit manager coming on board, who is experienced. he will be keen to act up, I'm sure, and the team will be keen to support him. So, and I'm sure Pete likewise will be supporting him from a chief officer's point of view. So it's productive, really.
So to my final point, Chair, really, which is, and I'll leave it to you to determine as to whether this is the most appropriate point in the meeting, given this is Andrew's last meeting, his last substantive item and input into the meeting. But just to sort of offer my thanks, I think, to he's been with us for a long period of time. I know, Chair, you want to offer your own words yourself, but I wish Andrew all the best for the future. He's provided, for a long time now, really high quality support into the committee, and I think that's been recognised both by the committee but by the council at large as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I think we'd like to echo those points, and really wish Andy the best of luck in the future. Only note of disappointment is that he hasn't brought in any cakes to the meeting, which was pretty shocking. But apart from that, of course, we do wish you all the best. Hopefully our paths will cross in the future, and, I'm sure you will flourish in your new role. Yeah.
Gosh, wow. Nobody likes an auditor normally. Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, members. Much appreciated. And thank you for your support. It's been really good.
Great. OK. In that case, let's move on. Item 12 is the Audit Wales Q3 work programme and timetable, noting that this report is dated December 2022, which seems a lifetime ago. But Charlotte, Rachel, anything you want to draw our attention to, please?
Thank you, Chair. No, obviously, I was just going to draw your attention to the fact that it is the position at the end of December, so conscious it's a little out of date now. Just to bring you up to speed on a couple of things which have changed since that point. We mentioned the annual audit summary, which obviously has now been issued as it was on the agenda earlier today. The statement of accounts work's obviously been completed. And in terms of the performance work, work has begun on the digital review that's mentioned in there. And we're also setting up field work for a couple of the other projects, which I think were down as being project briefs to be issued soon. So they've moved on slightly. But yeah, otherwise, I think there will be another one of these quarterly updates along to you shortly.
Great. Thank you. So we will note that update and move on to the next item, which is a forward work plan. So I think it's a very helpful template. I'm slightly sort of struggling in terms of what to do with it. So we need to update it to reflect the forward work, what's intended to be brought forward to future meetings, Wendy. So if you give us an action maybe to the accountable officer, and we can have a discussion about what that forward work plan actually looks like. We'll move on to item 14, which is to approve the minutes from the last meeting. As per usual, we'll quickly turn the pages. I'll do it at pace as usual, because Wendy actually drafts excellent minutes and there's never any sort of points of clarification required. So please shout out if you have any points to raise. I'm starting at page 145 in your meeting pack. 146, 147, 148, 149 and 150. Yet again, flawless minutes, Wendy. Excellent. Thank you ever so much. Before noting the date for next meeting, we have an item of AOB. That's from Matt Gatehouse again. So, Matt, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And it was just to return to the matter of Councillor Eason's question, where I think I gave an incorrect answer. So rather than letting this matter continue, I thought I'd just pick it up and correct it for the record now. And it was the question regarding risk 4 on the sort of cost of living actions. Yeah, on the risk assessment, yes. So there were 3 elements under risk 4 of actions. One of them isn't continuing. That's been communicated to staff, and that's the temporary uplift in mileage. That was justified because the mileage and the petrol and diesel prices have dropped back, so that's been stopped. I believe I will check the other two elements of that. I do just need to go back and check on, but I wouldn't want to leave the meeting having put some sort of misleading information out there. But just to confirm that the situation with that has been communicated to staff in receipt of mileage in an all-staff email by Matt Phillips as Chief Officer People and Governance. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you for doing that. And the final... yeah.
It was very small writing. I should have put my glasses on before attempting to answer that one because I saw only part of the issue.
Okay, and the final matter is to note the date of the next meeting, which is on the 15th of June. With that, this meeting is concluded. Thank you for your participation and see you in June. Many thanks.